Amazing. Hi, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with all of you here today. I'm very excited to moderate this panel with a great lineup of speakers. By way of quick introduction, I'm Paninda Thind, Finance Nature Lead with the Climate Champions team, supporting the UN High-Level Climate Champions for COP28 and COP29. And we have joining us on the panel today, Sajeev Mohan Kumar with FAIR Initiative, Claudia Gray with Share Action, Damien Broad with Adrian, and Julia Carboni with WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So to set the stage for a discussion, we will be talking about the role of nature in net zero. And nature, as we've heard over yesterday and today, underpins our social and economic systems. But the natural systems, as we know, are in severe decline. And on the flip side, restoration, protection, and sustainable management of nature poses opportunities for the business and finance sector. And we know that we need to reshape our relationship with nature. The topic of nature has been elevated for the private finance sector as a result of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, in addition to the Paris Agreement. And science tells us that we cannot meet the goals of the Paris Agreement without addressing nature, which can provide a third of the climate mitigation potential we need to meet our 2030 climate goals, as well as contribute to climate resilience. Last year, we made some strides on advancing on this climate-nature nexus. We, at London Climate Action Week, a year ago from today, launched the Nature Positive for Climate Action call to action with the UN High-Level Climate Champion and the CBD Action Agenda Champion as well, to really put a call to action for businesses and financial institutions on some key actions that they can take to put nature at the heart of their climate journey. So with that, we'll turn to our panel and start with, what do you see as the role of nature in meeting our net zero commitments, and what is the imperative and opportunity for the finance sector in this process? And Sajeev, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think just to introduce myself, I'm a senior technical specialist at FAIR Initiative in the climate and biodiversity practice. For those who are not aware of FAIR, we're an investor network. So we have over 400 investor members comprising of some of the largest asset owners, asset managers, insurance companies, philanthropies, et cetera, right? In a nutshell, what we do is essentially we act as a conduit for investors to shape corporate business practices around ESG disclosure, especially in the animal protein sector. So in terms of how sort of we interact with our investor members and help them, we have essentially like 4 sort of work streams or pillars. So one of them is the Protein Producer Index. It's sort of like a ranking or a scoring of protein producing companies across 5 protein types. And it has a huge emphasis on nature. We have over 300 KPIs related to risk and opportunities around nature, right? And one of the things that we observe is that when we look at these 60 protein producing companies, which are some of the largest, nature and biodiversity loss is among categorized as high risk, right? And then pushing the narrative a bit further, we also do collaborative engagements with our investor members. I don't have to explain to the room what that means, but essentially we bring investors and corporates on the same table to discuss material issues. And some of the engagements that we have is focused on biodiversity. And again, it's sort of like pushing the narrative in terms of allowing investors to sort of influence company behavior and strategies to be more nature positive, let's say. And this also has benefits for climate. We also do some work on policy, so basically giving investors a voice in terms of policy decision making, right, or policy making. An example of that is sort of investor statements that we put out. So we did put out an investor statement, which is backed by around 60 investors, worth around $20 trillion US, and where we asked the FAO to produce a agricultural roadmap, similar to the one that the International Energy Agency did for energy sector. So this sort of provides credibility and sort of like a showcase on climate and nature-based solutions for investors to have confidence in terms of investing in them. We also did something on repurposing agricultural subsidies to the G20 ministry. Again, I think that's really connected to nature, because without removing these perverse subsidies, it's very hard to create a level playing field for investors to invest in these solutions. I think just to share some insights on what we see, because I'm not from a DFI or an FI, but we do hear investor members who are mostly institutional investor members. I think they are focusing on some of the material risks around nature related to deforestation, let's say, right? So with the advent of TNFD and SPTN and SPTI flag, I think there is a focus on reacting and acting, and in terms of the engagement activities and stewardship activities on countering deforestation. So we see a lot of institutional investors asking for companies to disclose on that, set targets and align with some of these standards, right? The other one that we see sort of like in terms of capital allocation, to come back to your question, is sort of investment in real assets, in terms of better land management practices through partnerships or direct ownership or leases to have economic and financial benefits. We see direct investments or co-investments with companies within supply sheds to initiatives like regenerative agriculture, let's say. So that's one. I think also investing in project developers, and so partnerships with them. And also some philanthropic funding, which is also key in the space. The recent sort of action agenda on regenerative landscapes, where they pledged around $2.2 billion towards regenerative agriculture, is a good one. So I think these are some of the, in a nutshell, some of the activities that we see in the space. And at FAIR, we are really deeply invested in the nature space. And just as a plug, FAIR Investor Network is free to join. And all of the resources that we produce is free for our members. So if you want to join the network, reach out to me after the panel.
Amazing. Thanks, Sajeev. Claudia, same question, the role of nature in net zero.
Hi, everyone. I'll also give a short introduction. I'm Claudia Gray. I'm the head of financial sector research at the responsible investment charity Share Action. We've done some similar work in terms of hosting investor coalitions with FAIR in the last year, specifically on the agrochemical sector. My role is to head up the research team, and we produce the finance sector benchmarks. So we rank asset managers, insurers, and the largest European banks on their climate, biodiversity, and social policies, and also governance and stewardship elements. So very much as Peninda has said, like, I completely agree. There is a very strong role for nature in carbon sequestration, as we know, in carbon storage. We know that our forests, our grasslands, our peatlands, our wetlands, our ocean seagrass beds, the seaweed beds are incredibly important. We also know that we are approaching severe impacts of climate change already, and mangroves, coral reefs, many of these ecosystems are playing a really critical role in adaptation too. Alongside that, there's a big risk facing us that I feel like we maybe have not yet talked about enough in the last 2 days. And a piece of research that really stood out to me recently is the report published by the Green Finance Institute, which highlights that the compounding risks of climate and nature together over the next decade are likely to cause the UK a potential loss of 12% GDP. So this is comparable to the 2008 crash, COVID, and we aren't acting fast enough to address those compounding risks. So definitely recommend reading that report if you've not seen it already. What we see from our research is that there is rapidly growing investment in nature solutions, nature-based solutions. Our most recent benchmark we published was of the insurance industry that came out in April this year. And we looked specifically at the investment side of 65 of the world's largest insurers. And we see that now about half of those insurers are publicly disclosing active decisions to invest in nature, in biodiversity solutions. And the majority of those are linked to climate. They're linked to carbon sequestration and storage and the ecological role that nature plays in addressing the climate crisis. So we're seeing this change is happening. We need to see more of it. Half of the insurers is not enough. And then I guess finally I'd like to add that our panel here today is discussing the role of nature in net zero. I think we also need to remember that the role of achieving net zero in maintaining nature and the ecosystems and the ecosystem services that humanity needs to survive is equally important. And there's that very strong link that we're all aware of.
Thanks, Claudia.
Hi, everyone. I mean, speaking about the role of nature in the net zero, just to give you a bit of a word on Ardian, which is a fund manager managing more than 160 billion. And when we started the decarbonization strategy across a different strategy in the fund, we started the renewable energy, then the hydrogen, and then we start thinking about how we can have the nature playing a role in our fund strategy, and this comes as well from the discussion, the feedback we had with our partner and LPs, and some of them were wondering how can I address my net zero trajectory? How can you help me in having access to carbon credit, high quality carbon credit? how can I address the biodiversity aspect, and in somehow, I'm not saying that they are desperate, but they don't have the right tool or instrument. So, and this is why I think where the NBS proposition came into the picture for most of us, and proposing something for them which is relevant, in the sense that what we keep telling, that the NBS proposition is in somehow simple. I mean, forestry already exists for quite some time. It's available, there are standards, there is market, there is certification that would give you the relevant comfort. It's economical, maybe, as opposed to other solutions which are maybe more costly. It's scalable as well, in the sense that I mean, most of us have been working on some project where you can have a large-scale project able to deliver high volume, and you have as well the co-benefits. In somehow you can tick all the boxes that you are looking for in your decarbonization strategy, and this is why basically we got the stronger answer to LPs and investors.
Julia, with the WBCSD and the network of businesses that you engage with, what are you seeing as the role of nature in helping businesses achieve net zero commitments?
Yeah, so thank you. So WBCSD is not an investor, or we are actually represent 230 companies that are more the real economy, so that are actually more the investees. Therefore, very much part of the system. It's interesting, this conversation about nature and climate, especially for an organization that has been working on sustainability for decades, right? And we have actually a strategy that really puts nature, climate, and equity as the three pillars. We call them our three imperatives, really central. And then we start saying, wait, but there is a huge integration between the three, right? So we are moving there so for example, I just changed my title. Now I'm Director of Nature for Climate. And that to me was really recognizing also internally that there is a connection, at least, between these two pillars. I am not under neither of them, but I'm somehow moving across, right? My next aim is to include also the equity part in my title, so I'm kind of bringing everybody together. But it's really about bringing together. And the key challenge I see, well, so maybe in the next question I'll explain a little bit more about the projects, but what I can see, there is also, we have to recognize that it's but it's easier to talk about the connection because we know the science. But when it comes to implement, we have to also consider that every individual comes with their baggage of knowledge, culture, experience, and it's very difficult to cross some of these, we call them silos, but there are comfort zones where people are comfortable in talking about climate and doing GAGP. The person who does GAGP all their lives, and all of a sudden you're telling them about nature and the fact that you have to have, is biodiversity. What is biodiversity? And it's not just a definition, and it's not about ignorance. It's also about, changing, in a way, we're asking people to change jobs. So that integration is not easy. As an example, we have created what we call Nexus projects, where we bring together companies that have signed up for the climate and the nature, imperative under one project, which is Beyond Value Chain Action, where we talk about voluntary carbon market for nature, climate, and so on. We have companies that came in through both imperatives, but the same company, colleagues that have never met each other. They work for the same company. They meet in our kind of space, and they really, because they are from different functions, and I think that is something really important to consider, because the change to the integration is a very difficult challenge in any topic. This one in particular, where there are also going to be probably trade-offs, increasing costs, because some solutions to climate that don't consider nature might be faster and cheaper. And we have now to tell them, actually do a bit slower, maybe more expensive, but then you get triple benefits, because a natural climate solution is about climate mitigation, biodiversity gains, and equity gains. but with a very different mind, and then of course you have the CFO that is going to say, excuse me, why should I pay more for something that I can do probably a half of the price? So the science is there and we all support it, but there are also ways it's really important also to consider how organizations that are used to work in separate, because that's how most of us operate, really need to come together, because this is about a topic that needs integration.
Exactly. That change management piece is critical, and enabling that knowledge sharing and capacity building to not only focus on the win-wins, but as you mentioned, the trade-offs as well that all of you alluded to.
Just want to add a point, I think, just coming back to so we are doing a work now looking at creating a taxonomy of climate and nature-based solutions within the animal protein sector. And one of the things that we see when we try to measure impact is that nature-based solutions, as Julia said, I think also has this carbon emission reduction initiative, but also carbon removals, which I think is sort of like a win-win. It's an essential part of the net zero transition. And I think, Julia, you mentioned the UNEP report yesterday in your panel, and I think 37% of the mitigation required for your net zero goals by 2030 has to come from nature-based solutions, or can come from nature-based solutions, right? So you can't consider them sort of separate anymore, because there are huge synergies that we can leverage, but also trade-offs.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just maybe double clicking on that, Sujeev, if you can share a bit more about the work of the FAIR initiative and how you're engaging investors on addressing nature-related risks and opportunities and the recent trends that you're noticing in this space.
Yeah, I think, like I said before, I think we sort of interact with investor members in a variety of ways. And I think one of the key things that we do is also do research on emerging topics like regenerative agriculture. It's a key opportunity which has been cited by a lot of companies and also of interest to investors. But one of the issues was around credibility. So we sort of took the commitments of these 79 agri-food organizations and the commitments on climate and nature. And what we saw was there's a huge gap between the commitments and the implementation. So I think, this like in terms of target setting, in terms of baselines, in terms of ambition, in terms of even financially supporting some of the farmers. So these are some of the critical gaps which you point out, which I think our investor members can sort of look at and leverage through stewardship, or even through private equity, or just mobilizing capital there. And like I said, we do collaborative engagements on nature-related topics, and the idea is to sort of capacity build investors and do all the heavy lifting in terms of giving them the assessment framework and the engagement questions on highly material nature-related risks within value chains of companies, so they can sort of have this conversation with companies. And it's a two-way dialogue, right? It's not like a one-way sort of conversation. So they can co-create like a plan that incorporates nature as well in their strategies. And I also touched on the policy dialogue as well. So these are some of the ways which we sort of help our investor members address nature-related risks, but also leverage opportunities.
Exactly. And I love that this panel has various different perspectives, from business to investor and investor engagement and research as well. And Claudia, moving forward to you, given Share Action has done fantastic research on this topic, wondering if you can share a bit more about your recent research on biodiversity policies across the finance sector and how that relates to climate action progress that you're noticing across the finance sector more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the key roles that our benchmark reports play is to give that kind of state of the sector overview, like where are we seeing changes, where are the kind of emerging areas of leading practice, where are areas that we would like to maybe see more progress in the coming years. And we do that through developing a survey. We go through all of the publicly available information on the financial institutions. We then send that completed survey to those institutions to verify the data and have an exchange to make sure that our data is accurate. What we found in our insurance survey, and the insurance industry is way more interesting than, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, like whether I would find insurance this interesting, I would have said no. But obviously there's a really key role there as an asset owner. There's an incredibly important role in terms of de-risking emerging businesses, practices. So what we found, and one of the aspects about the biodiversity policies that I think is really essential, and we've already been discussing a lot in the last few days, is the assessment of impacts and dependencies. So in our last benchmark of the insurance industry in 2020, there was not a single insurer that had in place publicly available information on carrying out any form of biodiversity-related impacts and dependencies assessment. And that, of course, is a critical step. Like, as TNFD has now provided a framework for us to use, it's a critical step towards understanding what are the risks, what are the opportunities emerging from forestry and agriculture sector to start with. So unless those are in place, we're not going to understand what is the follow-on impact on deforestation, for example, which is playing a massive part in addressing the climate crisis. So in this year's survey, there's about a third of the insurers are now putting in place what is looking like it can be a robust impacts and dependencies assessment. There are obviously lots of challenges in doing that well. Direction is very much part of having the conversation about, with every single insurer, what are your peers doing? What is best practice? What are questions that we can help you answer? What are pieces of research that us or other NGOs or other think tanks are producing to assist in that area? Our asset manager benchmark last year indicated much higher, more like 73% of the asset managers in our benchmark, and we cover 77 of the world's largest asset managers, have already in place some assessment, at least of direct impacts of their investments. We've gone back earlier this year to ask all of those asset managers what have been the updates. We're revisiting that benchmark this year. So if you're from one of the firms that we survey, thank you very much in advance for filling it in. Our kind of brief update indicates that about a third of asset managers have really moved ahead in terms of impacts and dependencies assessments, sometimes now being able to look in very close detail at individual companies. Another aspect of the biodiversity policies, which is obviously crucial, is supporting solutions. And again, coming back to our insurance survey, I mentioned there are many more cases where we're seeing disclosure of investments. So CMP Insurances, who are top of our life and health insurance ranking, provided us with information about the 120 million euros that they've put into one of the Bank Postal's biodiversity funds, with a particular focus on circular economy and sustainable agriculture. So that level, we'll come later to talk a little bit about building credibility, but that public disclosure is a really key piece in saying, like, what is it that's possible? What are the limitations? What are the promising areas for development? What are the new funds that are being released, that are being developed? So that's quite an exciting area to be looking at. Investments in reducing use of plastics, reducing pollution, like all of these are playing part, protecting and restoring nature, and obviously helping us on climate. Obviously, there's also some really interesting products that are being developed by the insurance sector to do that de-risking piece. So we heard from Forestry yesterday about some of their forestry insurance products. I think one of the things that really stood out to us in the results from our survey is that in Asia we're seeing a lot of really specific carbon sink insurance products, so both on land and in the sea, which isn't really, we don't see so much of that in Europe, which is probably a big area of opportunity for the sector to be moving into. Another area that I think is probably going to emerge more is we only saw 3 insurers that declared there are preferential terms for companies that have done environmental risks, have got actions in place to reduce the impacts on biodiversity. So there's another area, again, like Forestry mentioned yesterday, that they're thinking of offering cheaper solutions, essentially, for companies that are addressing the biodiversity crisis in some way. We tried to assess the integration of biodiversity and climate together in these policies, and it was really hard to do because there isn't a clean way to do it. In the end, we had a really low bar just in terms of, like, are these financial institutions telling us that they're considering the interconnectedness of the biodiversity and the climate crisis in some way? And maybe half of them are managing to do that. So I think that's a really key piece that we're likely to see more development on. So our asset manager benchmark that we're coming back to this year will be specifically asking more about what is the inclusion of nature in thinking about transition planning, and what is the inclusion of nature in nature climate scenarios, which is also an area where, like, the science has been moving quite fast, and then the application of those is, there are challenging steps in terms of working out the qualitative scenarios, like what is a future policy scenario for nature that could be meaningful to explore with those scenarios. So that's a really interesting piece also that we'll be looking at and bringing into our research.
Fantastic, and clearly a lot of work that you've done and will continue to do on this file. And as you said, there are tools and resources now on the nature side, science-based targets for nature, TNFD, Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures, that can provide the starting point for businesses and financial institutions to get started on their nature journey. And on the climate transition plan side, GFANS indicated as well that they'll be putting out guidance on nature and climate transition plans later this year. So that also sends a very helpful signal to the market to start focusing on addressing these topics and the synergies between nature and climate. Damien, moving forward to you, from your perspective, wondering if you can share the growing interest from financial institutions to invest in nature as an asset class, and what are some tools and frameworks that can be used to avoid that risk of greenwashing that is very much out there as well that we're grappling with?
Yes, for sure. It's an existing risk that we keep having when we engage with investors, with LPs, and how can we prevent to have this kind of greenwashing. I think one of the answer is really the transparency. I mean, all of us, we have to disclose everything, that how we work, what we do on the ground. And so that there is not this perception that it's kind of a foggy market, delivering return, we don't know how, and what are the co-benefits. So I think from our perspective, it's really the full transparency. That's one. The second, which is related to transparency, is really to engage an investor partner to come on the ground. I know it might not be easy to go to Brazil or Ghana or whatever countries, but at some point, the closer you get to the project, the better you can understand what you're doing and why you are investing in those projects. So at some point, it's very much needed from the investor, either during the due diligence or down the road during the investment life. And the third point is really about for us, it's really the making sure that there is the transparency, but as well the alignment of interest with all the parties, meaning that first from the government perspective, that we need, all of us, we need to engage with government, making sure that they are aware that this project exists in the country. That's one. Second, that they get benefit from this, that there is a revenue sharing tax attached to those projects, and again, that is not foggy even from the host country. And the transparency and alignment of interest with the community, we have already tackled this topic many times, I'm sure, during the roundtable, but making sure that they are fully embarked in our project, but as well they get the benefit of it. So that there is no taboo whatsoever regarding sharing part of the carbon credit revenue, that most of the capex will go to social infrastructure, and making sure that there is nothing hidden in those projects.
Great, and as you said, voluntary carbon markets are one tool in the broader set of in the toolbox that we have to address nature and climate crisis simultaneously. And Julia, from your perspective, engaging with businesses on this, wondering if you can discuss the importance of corporate action on natural climate solutions, and what is the business case and some examples that you're seeing on this journey that businesses are taking?
Oh, easy question, the business case. The business case is not easy. So let's start from that. So I think we spend the majority of our time trying to prove it or find an entry, because it's not straightforward saying it makes commercial sense because you will cut cost, no, or have a better visibility. No, you generally actually have more risk, reputational risk, if you actually do one of these things. So, but let me tell you a little bit. So yes, the main message is to companies, try to maximize, the outcome for every dollar you spend. So invest in something that has climate, mitigation outcomes, biodiversity gains, and equity. And I keep repeating this because sometimes there is a misunderstanding what an NCS is. It's not just biomass. Let's say it's not just planting a tree. It's actually generating a biodiversity outcome, and it's generating a social outcome as well. So not every intervention is an NCS, and it's fine, absolutely fine. And that's something that also I think we found very important, that it's not a new term that now is, we have to label everything NCS. It's really important to keep it for the interventions that actually have that triple, benefit. So we do a number of things. We, as WBCSD, we create tools and standards to help businesses kind of, follow the flow. So I think three main things that I wanted to mention. One is that we have been working more generally than NCS on nature-based solutions, which, as you know, which are the main, definitions. And definition, again, are actions to protect, improve management, and restore nature with benefits for biodiversity and people. But this NBS idea came really from the, more the development world, right? NGO, conservation, development organizations, to help, especially development organizations, understand that they could have, with their development aid, also benefits for nature, right? And other societal challenges. And so from that perspective, doesn't necessarily make sense for a business, right? Because they say, yes, of course, we support all the SDGs, but if you want to integrate it within my own company, it has to make also sense from a business perspective. So after a few years of back and forth discussion, what does this mean? Actually, just a couple of weeks ago, we issued a really good blueprint for businesses to understand an MBS from a business needs perspective. So instead of spelling, these are the societal challenges, we start spelling, these are the business challenges, which are pretty much the same, at a different, obviously, a very different scale. But worded from a business perspective, you might have issues related to water quality, water treatment. You might have issues related to soil, for example, regeneration. You might have issues related to protection of your asset on a coastal environment. And then which biomes, and then start thinking about, okay, which solution makes sense for me? So it's not about, let's say, philanthropy, but it's really about using a tool out of a toolkit, a tool that usually a business is not used to, even engineers. We know a lot about, US systems to work on rivers. It's very engineered. So the idea is to change the mind frame and say there are other tools out there. And so this is what we are doing for business. Then on the other way, which is all about financing, and the other way of obviously financing NCS is really directly going and say, you purchase an action that has been done by somebody else, and that is an NCS voluntary carbon credit, which we are very active in that space, helping companies to understand what is a high integrity NCS, which in a way, I wish I didn't have to say high integrity, because NCS by default should be high integrity, but yes. We work very closely with ICVCM in developing the assessment framework to understand what, from a carbon perspective, is high integrity. And we work with a lot of the buyers and suppliers to catalyze action, right? And have also a push for companies that right now, a lot of companies are afraid even to think about this. So we have, an NCS procurement hub where we invite companies to come in and learn completely for free, completely protected. Nobody knows they're in that space, to understand how to procure NCS credits. Because that's the other point, is don't just go on the market and buy one credit. Yes, because it's true, 1 ton is 1 ton, but it's not actually, the certificate says 1 ton, but not every ton, even if, let's assume the integrity is there. And NCS has, depending on where you are, different values. And that's also what we are pushing companies to say, learn about these interventions, because there are a lot of other elements in there that you could actually use in relation to your company, to your, in your communication and so on. And the third area that we are working with is investors. So we have the Forest Investor Club that brings together investors to help them catalyze and push for more funding going towards natural climate solutions. Not only generate, with revenue generated for carbon credits, other forms as well, but of course carbon credits and forest management are the main actors, with the idea of mobilizing other investors to move their funding from maybe less interesting areas to this amazing area, which is combination of nature and climate and people. So that's our dream, that more and more funding goes into this, and we close the loop with companies that, for example, in the carbon market purchase these credits, or companies that want to invest in NBS, and then you have investors that sees this as a real opportunity. So working on different fronts with the center, with natural climate solution integration and hopefully kind of closing the loop.
That's great, and that value chain engagement piece is so key. When we talk about nature-related risks, it really is about supply chain resilience for many of
Yes,
the
exactly.
businesses.
And that's one of the business challenges that we have highlighted, and of course we have a number of case studies from agri-based, companies on how they have used nature-based solutions to strengthen their supply and not more, other type of interventions.
And are there specific sectors that you feel like are moving further ahead than others because the business case is stronger at this stage?
I think the business case is stronger for land-dependent sectors, but effectively, with some creativity, you can see an entry point for many. It's not obviously not across all sectors, but let's say even protection from even renewable energy, right? And infrastructures that are out in the sea or on the coastline, all of a sudden you have issues related to, impact of weather or weathering and so on. And then you can start seeing, okay, you can either put another layer of cement or you can use nature, right? So depending on the sector, you will have different type of challenges that are where nature is potentially a better solution. And yeah, I'm sure there is going to be some sectors that will really see it as a very long stretch. For some, is easier. That of course, so agri-food, the stretch is right there. Is water, is pollination, is soil, erosion, fertility. I mean, all of these are all services that nature offers. So, solve them with nature.
Exactly. And maybe zooming out a little bit, this is, as we know, the year of the 3 COPs. We have CBD COP16, the Nature COP coming up, as well as the Climate COP, COP29, and the UNCCD, the Land or Desertification COP, COP16 as well. And nature is the cross-cutting element across the 3 COPs. We've also heard the importance of having different actors being involved in this process. It's not that businesses can do this alone. We need investors, we need policymakers, and an enabling environment that can really accelerate this shift. So my question to all of you is, what is the call to action that you have for policymakers on creating an enabling environment that can allow us to accelerate this shift towards a just net zero and nature positive transition? Sanjeev, starting with you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I mean, we have many asks, but I mean, I just focus on one, right? So I think the main thing that we're focusing on is sort of repurposing agricultural subsidies. I think having them is sort of like creates an uneven playing field for mobilizing capital into the space, especially because I think, most of the policies that exist is sort of depending on the land you own or input subsidies that go into like sort of incentivizing intensive production systems. So if you want to see a shift towards nature-based solutions that calls for a systemic shift in terms of how we produce food, I think we need to repurpose some of these subsidies, right? So that is the main call to action from our side, and we have an investor statement that we are backing and taking it to some of these conversations. But also want to add one more thing. I think we focus a lot on sort of on-farm subsidies or from food production side. But I think there's also a wider picture to look at, because there's also like market infrastructure and other sort of policies related to food, but not necessarily on farm. I think that those are set up in a way that incentivizes the current way of producing food, right? So I think it creates some sort of a safety net or a lock-in for how we produce food. I think those also needs to be tweaked or changed so that some of these systemic shifts like nature-based solutions, regenerative agriculture can come in and change the shift. So I think those are some of the key messages that we're taking to some of the COPs that you mentioned.
So I kind of be a bit sneaky and have two. One's a kind of UK one and one more interesting on an international playing field. Our policy team does a lot of work and thinking around fiduciary duty. And I think that particularly in the UK, for the pension sector is really where their focus, my colleagues' focus has been around the current terminology is that fund managers need to be acting in the best interest of their members and beneficiaries. And the definitions and the application of that phrase, best interests, is mixed, and there is scope for better guidance in terms of that fiduciary duty being able to encompass long-term, not just long-term performance of assets that may become stranded assets, but also what is the impact of those assets if they're held over the long term for the beneficiaries in terms of their impacts on community, on the environment. And so I think the piece around for policymakers to give guidance on how to apply the definitions within current legislation around fiduciary duty is a really important area. Particularly for the pension sector, the trade-off in terms of your financial gains from your pension, you have more money. If you are going to be living in a much more expensive, much more high-risk and problematic world as a result of the social and environmental consequences of those investments over the next however many decades, then you probably would like the holistic interpretation of best interests to be the one that is used. We've been doing a lot more work thinking about competition law recently, and working with a group of competition lawyers around the guidance that does already exist in the UK and in the EU, that if a group of investors want to come together to discuss a particular position they want to take for their investments, that might be, for example, on biodiversity or climate change, that there is already competition. The CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, has issued guidance saying investors can come together and have that conversation. And of course, we've seen various parts of GFANZ fall apart as a result of lack of faith in being able to come together and have those discussions in a collaborative environment. I think that if more jurisdictions are able to issue those guidelines and to be able to support the collaborative initiatives that already exist, like Nature Action 100, which is issued, the metrics have been published recently. There's loads of brilliant work that these collaborative initiatives should be doing, and they should be able to do it without fear of litigation.
Yeah. No, that's a really, really helpful point, given the current environment that we're in, that is destabilizing the acceleration of action. Damien?
I would see two main topics for the policymaker. The first one being the disclosure. In Europe, we already have the CSRD, which is a good step in the sense that now more and more corporate have to disclose what are their strategy and efforts regarding carbon emission and what type of carbon credit they buy, what is the quality. So I think it's a lot of burden maybe for some corporate or even SMEs, but still I think it goes into the right direction. That, I mean, you have to disclose everything what you do, and this will stimulate the markets, because in somehow when you see that your competitor or partner is doing better than what you do, basically it would drive the market up in somehow in terms of volume, quality, co-benefit. So the more the policymaker ask this disclosure, the better it is for the market. And the second point, which is it's a broad topic, but the interconnection, I know that UK is working towards that direction, but the interconnection between the VCM and the ETS is probably a good way to incentivize the market. Maybe start with 5-10% in some, is what happening in some countries, but having this possibility to have the voluntary player into the ETS, I think goes into the right direction.
That importance of transparency and in integration to prevent silos is quite key. Julia?
Yeah, so a lot has been said that I said yes. I'm not going to repeat that. Maybe more on themes. So first, definitely level playing field. If we really want to push this, we work often with leaders, and this is, we know when we are, because we see in the room the usual suspects, and we need to go beyond the usual suspects and mainstreaming. And and we know also that these leaders believe that disclosure is the tool. You have seen there were, a lot of push from companies asking, the CBD and others to really make disclosure mandatory. And that is incredible when actually businesses are asking for that. Now, you look at the list, we know them all, right? But they also understand that there is so much they can push things internally if this doesn't become mandatory, because at a certain point, things also change within a company. So it's really important to build on this social capital that has been built within businesses to do to start disclosing, to take action, and make it really mandatory, because so then there is no way out. Everybody there is locked in. So, creating a level playing field through mandatory requirements. Then the other thing, however, is this idea of the voluntary carbon market is voluntary. And I am a true believer that it's important to have some elements voluntary, because they are the more the creativity, and they push the bar beyond what is mandatory. But being voluntary doesn't mean that it shouldn't be regulated, because there are two different things. So I think what also is really important, that there is some more clarity and stability to the market, and governments can do a lot, right? So we have voluntary initiatives such as the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. I'm a board member and I don't know the acronym. That's great. The ICVCM. That voluntarily, but with a lot of effort, for example, is creating a benchmark reference on what is a high integrity. But the last thing we want is then governments popping up with their own tools and everything. So we need rules, but we need also kind of integration and going in the same direction, because otherwise business investors, buyers are just going to be confused. And confusion right now will equal like, I'm not going to do it. Because let's not forget, this is voluntary. So either we make it easy or it's not going to happen.
That's a great point, and I think came across in everyone's remarks the importance of harmonization underlying that, and interoperability as well. With taxonomies are coming out, around green finance and sustainable finance taxonomies, knowing that investors very much move beyond the domestic market and focus on international investments as well. That is going to be quite important. I know I'm looking at the clock, and we do have a few minutes left, so I would like to get everyone's insight into the role of public financial institutions when we talk about systems level change, and how they can catalyze private capital at the speed and scale that we need to see to focus on nature-based solutions.
Yeah, I think I'll just try to be quick. I think the way I see it is sort of, if I look at a maturity curve, right, of a nature-based solution or climate solution, I think there is a role for public finance institutions to play. I think initially, maybe in the earlier stage, it's sort of like funding that proof of concept in terms of making sure that the solution can deliver the impact it delivers, right? But moving along the line, once that is established, I think making sure that the capital is there, maybe for a company or co-investing within a supply shed, to make sure that this technology or solution is feasible in the market, I think is the second stage. And I think the third one, I think where DFIs can play a role, is sort of de-risking, right? And we talk about blended finance quite a bit, but it's sort of like creating that cushion and attracting private finance and giving them that attractive proposition where you have like offtake agreements agreed already with CPG companies in the food production space, etc. So these are some of the ways where they could just come in and sort of like offer that capital to push and spur that before it becomes like sort of institutional investor grade investments, right, for these solutions. So they have a huge role to play in all of these different aspects along the maturity curve of a solution.
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of interesting discussion along these lines already, so I don't want to repeat some of the themes around de-risking and being the driving force, bringing in technology and expertise. I think one of the things actually that I was reflecting on during the previous panel is that there's a very interesting role to play in terms of highlighting the value of the primary forest, or the primary habitat of the undisturbed ecosystems that remain a really key part. I was reading an article that was published earlier today about how the biodiversity richness, the species diversity of forests is actually very, very critical, particularly the plant diversity, to its carbon value. And this beautiful photograph behind us is quite a good visual reminder also of these are trees planted in straight lines. They're all the same age. There is not very much 3D complexity. And there are lots of native forests that still have that do need to be protected. One of the things that we look for within financial institutions policies is careful thinking and due diligence and risk management around global areas of biodiversity importance. And World Heritage sites and Ramsar sites have had a lot of attention. The Global Protected Area Network hasn't yet and needs to, because of the role of these less disturbed habitats in both nature and climate. And I think there's a space there for public finance to help drive that.
Yeah.
I spend quite a lot of time in the FI community, so I do value the benefit of having the FI bringing a long-term and patient capital that it's fundamentally needed for NBS projects. So having DFI looking at seriously this market is really good sign. Second is from the country perspective, because when you go and see, when you go and meet LPs that your project are located mostly in the tropical belt, they start looking at you. Well, Africa, it's kind of a mess. So having DFI on board with us will give a strong signal that okay, we can do business, we can do impactful business in those geographies. So that's a strong signal. And the last but not least is that we can't compromise on the social and environmental issues. So either you walk away because it's too complicated, or either you address, but you address it properly under the best standard, the IFC performance standard. We know that it's complicated, but if you do it properly along with DFI, it works.
Yeah, so can only say I totally agree, and especially the comments you were making about the role of DFIs. I honestly think for a lot of these projects, and again, we are talking about nature conservation, restoration project. We are not talking about large capital expenditures in, offshore wind, which are a very different game, right? So a lot of these projects are going to be small from a financial perspective. And there is no way they're small because they're about that patch of forest or that area that needs to be restored. Okay, maybe in the forest management it's different, but the let's say that NCS that looking at protecting existing forest or restoring nature to natural habitats are never going to be of that size. So I think the presence of a DFI is going to be absolutely critical, because for a lot of other projects, otherwise, a pure commercial investors will say, way too risky. I don't have the patience. I mean, and this issue of patience is so important. We have a lot of the project developers we work with, and I say, if they have to say that one of the learning was really the investors they finally found, the key characteristic was the patience, the understanding that it will take time. We will have to go through a lot of learning processes, getting the community on board. I mean, there are very different type of interventions, right? It's not clean in the sense of, here I have a set of things we do and it's over. We know, the whole issue about adaptive management comes from conservation, which is you decide to go that way, and 3 days later you're going that way because something happened, a community said something, you've understood that the system is not working the same way. And that's the key to success. And I think for investors is to really understand this, and I think probably DFIs are the more natural players to really understand this because it's in their D. Yesterday I had that question. The D really represents this element of making sure that the project has also these elements of sustainability incorporated. So I think they play a key role. I would suggest, and this is something that I want to go back also to the people that I work, that were on my panel yesterday, to really start creating a stronger connection between DFIs and project developer to really have even a stronger understanding. What are the needs on the ground, but also what are the DFI's needs in terms of how you pitch the project? What are the information to make the system more efficient, right? And so definitely we would be happy to make that connection, but I think there is going to be a lot of opportunity for DFIs to really make a huge difference on the ground for nature and people.
I think that's a great note to end on. And as you said, this ecosystem, creating this ecosystem of capital mobilization towards the solutions that we need to see. So with that, I know we're keeping you from lunch. I'd like to thank this fantastic set of panelists and for all their insights during the session today. Thank you.